It's great to be here, not far from home. So I know Wayne Zipser was going to be here and Kelly Fogarty, and they couldn't make it, so they asked me to stand in. So just a couple of corrections. I no longer represent the California Farm Bureau. I termed out as president in December, so I'm now a has-been, and back to farming full-time and enjoying it. As I tell folks today, when I work up a 20-acre field and get it all done and look back and see with satisfaction I got something done, in 20 years being an officer of the Farm Bureau and working in the political arenas, sometimes it takes years and years to get things done. Then when you get them done, they can be changed really quickly. And so it just takes continual staying on course, staying involved and engaged, and entrusting those folks that are in those leadership roles you know, to do the right thing and kind of hold their feet to the fire and ask them why they're doing what they're doing. And also, I'm not the second, I'm only the first. I don't think anybody would want a second Paul Wenger, so I'll just leave it at that. You know, I've always, when I came back and graduated from Cal Poly, came back, started farming with my dad. It was a very different time when you started thinking about in the 80s. When my dad, growing up, you know, born in '55 and watching him farm, you could kind of do just about anything you wanted to do. And nobody really questioned it. The majority of the people that lived in this community were about the 7th largest agricultural county. Stanislaus County, John may have covered it in his presentation. I got here a little bit late. But California being the largest agricultural state in the country, and I know I was recently in Iowa and I was talking about it. And you know, I said if you combine Iowa and Texas together, they would still be the second largest agricultural state compared to California. The farmers and the ranchers in California are no different than those in Iowa or those in Texas or those in any other state in the country. But we have been blessed here with a very unique topography and a geography that allows us to capture rain and snow on our eastern Sierra foothill, or on our Sierra mountain range, and hopefully store that and help some of that percolate into the ground. We have a Pacific Ocean off our west coast. We've got a diversity of geographic regions. On my board, I had one of my board members from Imperial, where 2 inches of rainfall a year was a really wet year, and last year with the atmospheric river that we had, one of my board members from up in Humboldt County, just north of Humboldt County, had 165 inches of rainfall. And so when you think about that diversity in California and the fact that we have all these microclimates, that's why we can grow 350 different commodities. It's not because I, as a farmer, or John, or Alan Cover, or Andrew Watkins, or others in here that I know from this area are any better than our brethren from any other state, but we have been given and live in an area that has been blessed by God by the natural topography. But we are also the largest, most populous state in the country. And so as we talk about, we hear all these figures, and figures are fungible. They're going to be different for different areas. And we hear that 2% of the population is directly involved in production agriculture today. California, that's less than 0.5%. So we got 76,000 farms, give or take, maybe a few less now, that are out there producing this cornucopia of products, and yet we're so busy with the challenges that we have in this very regulated environment here in California, when you've got 40+ million people looking over your shoulder, drones flying over, satellites, people going up and down the road looking over, questioning what you're doing, that sometimes you can spend so much defending what you're doing, explaining what you're doing, you can't really go out and do what you wanted to do. And so I've always believed in that little story or that little saying that the rights of an individual standing alone are just as important as the rights of an individual standing in a crowd. But today we have a crowd mentality. We see it time and time again on demonstrations, wherever it is, and that I can understand why sometimes we could be called lemmings. You get a couple of very influential people at the start of a parade, and the next thing you got a lot of people joining in. What are they there for? They don't know, but they just saw a parade and they're going to join in. And so everybody thinks that these voices that are out there are insurmountable, that we have to deal with. And so when I came back from agriculture, when I came back from Cal Poly and I started seeing, I became a licensed PCO, pest control operator, where I apply pesticides. And I can remember my good friend, mentor, neighbor, Alan Cover, he said, "Paul, you don't want to do this. You don't want to be there out there at night spraying all these chemicals. And it's just like anything. I said the day I no longer respect them is the day that I'll get away from it. But until then, it's something that I needed to do because a lot of those folks in the area that didn't go on to a four-year institution, we saw a big transition of leases in the area, and they had the leases. So I went out and started doing things like that. Well, one day a little white pickup with an insignia came in. They had to do an inspection on me, and I saw that our livelihoods were changing because we have a lot of people overlooking our shoulder of what we do. When that county ag inspector came in, that county ag inspector is a pretty good guy. In the car with him was a state ag inspector that was inspecting the county ag inspector. And then there's a bunch of laws and regulations that are made by 120 people in our California legislature that goes down to DPR and now Cal EPA that tells folks what hoops they got to jump through, what hoops we got to jump through, and they've got to enforce it. And so there's well-meaning people that are trying to do a job, and they want to cover their rear end, and they want to make sure they still have their job. And a lot of times nobody understands why these rules and regulations got on the books to begin with. And so that's why I got involved in Farm Bureau. I went to the coffee shop one day. I never heard so many solutions, so many griping, so much bitching in my life, and absolutely nothing got done about it. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try to provide a vision that we can change things for our future. But what I didn't really, the very thing that I really admire and respect on those folks that you represent here in this room and others are out in their fields and their farms and their ranches today, that for us in agriculture to be successful, we got to be stubborn, we got to be individualistic. We typically talk pessimistically and live optimistically. You know, either it's too hot, too cold, prices are too high, too low, and yes, I even heard people complain about prices being too high because it's going to bring other people in to compete with them. But yet we go out and we work hard. There's very few people in society today that would wake up every morning and take on the challenges that people in agriculture and dealing with the natural resources and the natural environment have to deal with, because everybody thinks Mother Nature is nice and fluffy. It's a babbling brook with nice, you know, grass growing by the riverside or the stream side, and this calm breezes blowing. Just tell me about it when the hail was out here the other day pulverizing a lot of our crops. And when we have, you know, sudden cold wave comes through and frosts your crops, or when you have other things that come through, a wildfire that decimates your forest or your grazing land, and yet you have to move on. But you know, we're a bunch of individualistic individuals that, stubborn individuals that sometimes don't work too well together. Alan Cover is a walnut grower like I am, and as I've told people before, if you get 5 walnut farmers in a walnut orchard and talk about what style of pruning you should do, you're going to have about 7 ideas, because a couple of us are going to change our mind. But we're just sure that the last decision we made was the best decision. So it's sometimes kind of hard to get us to work together. And when I think back about those folks at the coffee shop, that they would go in there, and I see a lot of those folks, they would be there in the morning for breakfast, they'd be there at 10 o'clock for coffee, they'd be there for lunch, and they'd be there for Coke or tea in the afternoon. Probably spent $20 a day, got a lot off their chest, and did absolutely nothing. And so I kind of went out on a little bit of a stump speech for a while, telling folks, you know what, for 1 week, don't go to the coffee shop. You'll get more work done. Take that $20 a day and send it to a commodity organization, a membership organization like Farm Bureau, Cattlemen's Association. Invest it in political action, because 1, you'll get more work done, and you'll have a greater chance, if we can get your neighbors to do the same thing, that we'll be able to change the future we have before us. I know what Earl Williams was a past president of the California Cotton Ginners Association. I was talking to him one day, and he says, Paul, we have 40 million people in California. He said, we're only as good as the last report that came out in the media, whether it's TV, whether it's a newspaper or social media that came out. And, you know, you can have 99 attaboys, and that one oh shit is going to send you down the river, because everybody just knows, and they're going to focus on that one bad story, even though there was 99 really good ones. So he said, we have to focus on the source of the problem. And that's 120 people that sit in our California state legislature. He said it's a lot easier to control those 120 if you take it to a national level, the 535, or each of your individual states in your state houses. And I know some of you are from states that still have a majority of folks that understand agriculture and understand business, but certainly here in California, we've lost control of that, with a near supermajority for the Democrats, and most of those not business-friendly Democrats. We certainly have some, but they are in the minority in their own party because they come from very liberal areas where folks have no understanding of where their food comes from. They have very little understanding of business and profit and loss and those things. And so we've got to figure out a way to control those 120. Well, I always say, if you want to be successful, you can certainly come up with your own avenue to success, or you look at somebody else that's successful and kind of copy it. It's the best form of flattery is to copy somebody that knows what the hell they're doing, and you can see that they've been pretty successful at it. So as I got more involved in Farm Bureau and the politics of it, I started looking around, and there's a thing called the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, CCPOA. Now, certainly when Governor Brown was governor the first go-around, he allowed for collective bargaining. It allowed for folks to be able to mandate for their members to have to contribute to dues as well as political action, something that we cannot do in our membership organizations and our other advocacy organizations like Farm Bureau. But they're about 30,000 strong. There was an individual by the name of Don Novi. And if you can think back that before they really had the ability to collective bargaining and form their group, the CCPOA, being a prison guard wasn't the best job, didn't have the best benefits. You're working in an environment that really wasn't good, didn't have a good retirement or anything else. So Don Novi was an individual that rallied these folks together and said, if you want to change your future, then you better pull together and you better assess yourselves and let's go out and let's change our future. And that's what they did. They're about 30,000 members strong, sometimes a little bit more, a little bit less. And so they did that, and today they are, without doubt, one of the most powerful lobbies in the world. In fact, today, as we hear about the unpended pension funds, they looked to the CCPOA and they said, gosh, there's not enough money to cover all the pensions for a lot of the retiring police and the prison guards and others. Okay, maybe they went too far, but you know what? They set their destiny. They didn't wait for somebody else to feel sorry for them. They didn't talk about themselves, about how good they are because they're keeping the criminal element away from society and we should be loved and we should be respected and admired for who we are. Yet we in agriculture, we love to get together and say we're the salt of the earth. And you know what? We are. But I ain't going to buy you a cup of coffee. We have got to be advocates and aggressive in doing what we're going to do to change our future, or our future is going to be inevitable. There's going to be fewer and fewer of us. There's going to be more and more people out there that thinking anybody that's got land shouldn't have it. Anybody that has a water right shouldn't have it. As we've been going through the State Groundwater Management Act and we talk about defending our water rights and senior water rights, which is incredibly important to this area, Modesto and the Turlock irrigation districts, and I've sat in rooms where people have said, the folks that made the laws at the turn of the 20th century that allowed us to have our pre-1914 water rights, they could never have envisioned a state and a world as it is today, or they wouldn't have made these rules. And my argument is, no, they did envision it. They knew that in the future there's going to be a lot more people, and if they didn't have the rules on the books now to protect those individual rights, that everything would be lost down the road. So God bless those folks that utilize the Constitution and use the rule of law, but now it's up to us to defend it. And we can't just talk about it. We can't just go to the coffee shop and talk about it. We just can't get on social media and talk about it. We've got to aggressively go out and defend it. It's just like if you want to get into any business, You have got to go out and you've got to work hard. You've got to get up early. You've got to work late, and you've got to invest a lot. And then by the grace of God, you might be successful. But I'll guarantee you, if you get out of bed at 10 o'clock in the morning, you retire at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and spend more money taking vacations and buying cars, whatever business you're going to be in is not going to be successful. And don't look over at the other person that is getting up early, investing hard, and working late, and say, well, look what they got. I should have had that. And so we've got to go out and we've got to really protect ourselves. And we can't fight among ourselves. I can remember with the Irrigated Lands Program, we have it here in California. We have to monitor the water because they're worried about us polluting. First it was surface water. Then when we went through all the issues to show that we were cleaning up the surface water, and we did have a problem. Certainly if we can isolate a problem, we can identify it, we'll solve it. We're problem solvers. People in business, and especially in agriculture, we're problem solvers. And we solved the problem of polluted runoff. So then they went, well, we're going to go to groundwater, and you have nitrates in the groundwater, so we had to develop an irrigated lands program. And I can remember when it first started. And we had a meeting up at Rancho Cordova, and I told a lot of my neighbors that were going to the coffee shop, you need to get in your pickup truck or your car, get your neighbors, and let's go to Rancho Cordova, because they're going to have a hearing. You're going to get 3 minutes to go up and give your piece. But you need to be there. And you know what they said? Nah, it's for Farm Bureau to do. That's why I pay my Farm Bureau dues. Well, Farm Bureau is there to tell you and not cry wolf all the time, but sometimes you have the leadership of our organizations, and whether it's Farm Bureau, cattlemen's, Western growers, whatever it is, they're there to represent you day in, day out, but sometimes you need the troops. And this was one of those times we needed the troops. Nobody hardly showed up at all from agriculture, and 6 busloads of hippies from San Francisco came. And every one of them had their 3 minutes to go up there talking and venting with the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, and they had not a clue what they were there for, but they were going to be given a box lunch and get to come and feel like they were important. As we were doing the hearings, and I got to go up and give my 3 minutes and others, and I had my youngest son, Luke, with me at the time, and this is now, he was probably about 14 years old, been a number of years ago when we had those first initial meetings. And there was an older gentleman got up with a cowboy shirt, snap cowboy shirt, hadn't probably been up in front of a group to talk, maybe ever, in his 70s. And as we were going through the motions, you saw all the people on the board, they were sitting up there doodling on their paper, probably playing tic-tac-toe or whatever else. And this elderly gentleman got up there and he started talking. Every one of them put their pens down and they listened. As I told my son Luke, I said, that right there is credibility. You got an elderly gentleman, he told him how he managed the water resources on his farm and what a steward he was to what he did day in, day out. But there was just one of him and there was 6 busloads of other people. But that is the kind of credibility we need to have. And we need people to come out of the woodwork. We need to get them off the tractors, out of your pickup truck, and you need to go to meetings when you're told to go there. And then it's up to your organizations not to have you go if it's not going to help. I can remember there was another meeting. Adam Gray had one on a water bill a couple of years ago, and so he's our local assemblyman here, one of our local assemblymen, and so we had a couple of busloads come out of here, out of Stanislaus County, and we had some out of San Joaquin County. We already knew what the vote count was going to be. They were going to lose. But they wanted to do some PR, whatnot. We had all these families up there talking about this water bill. It went through, and it didn't even get out of the legislative committee. And a lot of them like, why did we waste our time? Don't set your people up for a loss. You've got to make sure that you send the troops in when you have an opportunity to win. Because the best way to create apathy and dissension is to have people go and waste all their time, taking time away from their family and other things and their businesses to go and just say, oh, it was a slam dunk, it was already going to go down, what did we come here for? There are those times we can make a difference, and you got to make sure that it's the leaders of your organizations that know when to have the troops show up. And the other thing is, let's not shoot ourselves in the foot and shoot each other. In 2008, here in California, we had a thing called Prop 2. I'm not sure if you heard about it, but it was about where the egg laying facilities, they wanted to get out of what they called battery cages at the time, confined cages, and they wanted to go to where a bird could, spread their wings and not touch another bird. They wanted to have the gestation crates and other things. Prop 2 passed. It passed, even the Farm Bureau members called me and said, we really like our local humane society, and this is about dogs and cats. No, it's not about dogs and cats. It's not about your local humane society, which we all support because they do good things for strays and doing neuter programs, spay and neuter programs. This is about Wayne Pacelle and his political agenda to do away with animal agriculture. But everybody got confused, and there was no way that we could fight and defend against Prop 2. So we got Prop 2. And right after that, one of the things that I felt pretty good about that during my tenure and being in leadership is Arnold Schwarzenegger, a bill came up the next year that said, okay, when this comes into effect, January 1 of 2015, where all eggs sold in California have to be Prop 2 compliant, we passed a bill along with the Pacific Egg and Poultry Association, or we proposed a bill. It got through the legislature. And funny as it would be, Jared Huffman, who's never really been a friend of agriculture, supported that bill because of the poultry industry in Sonoma County. Governor Schwarzenegger was going to veto it. I happen to know Susan Kennedy, his chief of staff at the time, and they said he's going to veto this bill. Is there any way you could outreach to the Schwarzenegger administration? I knew his chief of staff pretty well. I called her up and I said, if the voters in California voted through Prop 2 because they want the eggs that are going to be on their breakfast table to be produced a certain way, then by God, every egg marketed in California ought to have to be that way. There have to be consequences for actions. Otherwise, things will just keep going the way they're going. Especially since Wayne Pacelle and the HSUS said that if you pass Prop 2, it'll only increase the price of eggs a penny apiece, 12 cents a dozen. I hope the eggs go to $5 a dozen. I wanted to see people going for their Egg McMuffin wondering how they're going to pay for it. I want them to know that when they voted for Prop 2, this was the lie that they supported. And if they don't see consequences for actions, then nothing's going to change. And so Schwarzenegger was going to veto that bill. He signed that bill. And so then he came back to us. He said, we'd like some signing language since we're going to sign this bill. And I wrote that language. It was just great that a few years later, the American Farm Bureau and 7 other state farm bureaus, and I was on the American Farm Bureau board at the time, sued California over that bill. I think it was 1383, or I forget the numbers right now, in the Assembly bill. And the language they were suing over was the language that I wrote. And I'll tell you, it was a very interesting March meeting in Washington, D.C. at AFBF when I went up against 7 of my other state presidents. Folks, not a single one of those states sent as much as $1 to California to fight against HSUS. And in fact, many of them thought that if our egg producers, and we were the 5th largest egg producing state in the country, and yet we were egg deficient because of 40 million people, they thought if the 5th largest egg producer went out of business, that it was going to be good for their farmers in their state. We got to get rid of this, folks. You cannot climb the ladder of success by seeing half the number of people here, because when there's half the number of people in this room, there's half the number of people involved in production agriculture, they got you. They got you. When we start thinking about, we see today a lot of venture capitalists coming into agriculture. We see a lot of pension funds coming into agriculture because they can see that the stock market is up and down, so they're coming into the resource area. I'll guarantee you that's a bad trend. We need folks like you and me and the others that are out there that are generational, and even if you're not generational, you're first generation. Jamie Johansson took over from me, has the very same passion for agriculture I have, first generation farmer. Our first vice president, Shannon Douglas, first generation farmer. And Sean Crook from Tuolumne County, he's a generational farmer in the timber industry, but we've got young people today that want to make agriculture, whether it's cattle, timber, or farming, their way of life, and they're just as passionate about it. But we got to make sure that we have producers who are also owners and have something engaged in it, involved in it. So we've got to make sure that we're not fighting ourselves. We've got to be able to work together, and I think our future will be much different. I didn't have the lapel pin, but here a couple of years ago, I challenged some of our Farm Bureau folks, and if they would commit to $1,000 to political action, and they could do it in 10 years at $100 a piece or one time $1,000, but I was hoping they would do it time and time again. And we got a few folks to get involved in political action, but not near enough. And as I told them, we had 30,000 farmer members in California Farm Bureau Federation. I said, if we did $1,000 a year in a 2-year election cycle, that's $60 million. Folks, with $60 million in California, even as liberal as we are, we would outraise substantially the Democrat Party. Not what goes to Democrat candidates, but what the Democrat Party itself raises in a 2-year election cycle. Do you think we couldn't be influential in Sacramento and Washington, D.C.? We have to defend the folks that are our friends that are in our state house, but because of redistricting, they are redistricting agriculture into oblivion. And it's very interesting. I talked to Russell Baining from the president of Texas Farm Bureau, and I said the great red state of Texas is going to be controlled by those little areas of blue, just as we see here in California. Because when you look at California, we're a red state. We're a pretty good state of people that understand that we cannot tax people into success, that we have to be able to allow entrepreneurism and the use of natural resources, but yet we are controlled by that very thin line of blue. We hear about how we in the Valley aren't taking good care of our employees and things like that. 2 years ago in 2016, we had the 40-hour work week was passed. 8-hour work day, 5 days a week, 40-hour work week. I don't know how we're going to do that around agriculture. And it was passed by people in the Bay Area that said, well, farmers and ranchers are taking advantage of their employees. Oh, really? It was just after they passed the $15 an hour minimum wage. And we had the University of California, we had an economist there that did a study on the minimum wage and the geographical differences. And so he said in 2020, when the minimum wage takes, 2022, when the $15 an hour minimum wage takes effect, a $15 an hour minimum wage in San Francisco equates to $7.80 here in the Valley. That's why one of my employees 2 years ago that was making $15 an hour qualified to buy a house in less than a week. And when you think that over in San Jose, the median priced home is now $1 million or more, and people making 6 figures are homeless because they don't want to have to commute, and so they're living in their car, they're living in a van or something. Flipped in another way, since we're going to be paying $15 an hour minimum wage here, and most of us pay well above that, but it does move everything else up because the guy making $20 in a $10 an hour minimum wage environment now wants to think that that differential needs to stay there. But when we have $15 an hour minimum wage here in the Valley, you know what it's going to equate to, or should equate to in San Francisco? $33.50 an hour, and yet you have those liberal politicians in San Francisco going, look what we've done to create a working wage for people. That's why the Altamontes Pass is filled every day with people commuting from the Valley, taking 2 and 3 hours of their day to commute over and 2 to 3 hours a day to commute back because they can't live over there. And we've got these very liberal folks in the Bay Area that are just happy having the people that are their janitors, their taxi cab drivers, the people that are making up beds or cooking their food and serving their food, living in the Valley and not over there. And so we've got to fight back. We can change that because most of the 40 million people here in California are politically apathetic. It really comes down to who is going to invest the most time and capital to be successful. And it's like my uncle once told me, he said, Paul, if people aren't going to fight when they're strong, when are they going to fight? And I'm going to wrap up by saying this. I remember a couple of years ago, I got up and got on one of my little dander boxes about political action. There was an elderly walnut farmer, Al Bonturi, over in San Benito area. He said, Paul, he said, as long as farmers and ranchers are making money, they're kind of like that baseball player that won't change the socks or underwear as long as they're winning. As long as they're making money at the end of the year, they're not going to try to upset the apple cart. But at some point in time, that flips. And I said, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, okay. A couple of years later, with the dairy industry going into a dive, it's pretty bad again right now, and it's kind of gone this way, but we had some suicides of young dairymen taking over the family operation and lost it. It was a very interesting, surreal to have articles in the Ag Alert, what to look for in somebody for suicide prevention, and we're getting back into some of that now on the dairy industry. I sent out my Farm Pack newsletter that year. I couldn't believe it. The number of dairies that sent significant checks. It was too late. If we are going to wait till it's our last gasp and think that we are going to change our future, it is too late. It takes 5 years for me to start to turn a profit. I hear Andrew can do it a little bit better up in Linden. Maybe 4 years, Andrew. But it takes 4 to 5 years that we start cash flowing in walnuts. But if we don't take care and manage and invest and spend the time for those 4 to 5 years, I'll guarantee you we're not going to be successful. So Trent, thank you for letting me come and speak a little bit, because at the end of the day, it's great to talk among ourselves and to ourselves and with ourselves, but look across the aisle, look at the other table. That's not the enemy. We know where the enemy is, and we can come to meetings like this, we can talk on social media. I mean, hearing from earlier, I think it was Dr. Simmons talked about the Heritage Foundation report on the ESA. I don't need to read the report. I know how bad the ESA is. We're not going to solve the ESA with another report from the Heritage Foundation. It's going to be writing the checks and getting the right people in there that can do something about it. And you got a speaker coming up right behind me. I think he's here, right?
He's next.
He's next, that out there fighting the fight. And we've got to make sure that we can come up with the funds to make sure that they have enough people and allies they can go to, not only on the Republican side of the aisle, but also on the Democrat side of the aisle, that they can get things done. Because we know how bad the Endangered Species Act is. So Trent, thank you for letting me come and talk. If there's time for a question or two, I'll take it. But
we had one earlier that I'm going to tie into something you said, and hopefully it'll expand, and I think they're related. Farm Bureau has been very good about letting people know what percentage of disposable income is spent on food. And I want to tie that in with something you said in terms of how it resonates. Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Yep.
You referenced Proposition 2. And you and I were sitting in San Mateo in April 2008, and we were trying to figure out what the right strategy was for communicating to then 38 million Californians what the impact would be if you told the egg farmer how many inches of space a chicken needs. And we went and we tried to convey that message, and it didn't work. We got smacked big time. We lost every county. And then when the law went into effect in 2015, January 1, all the media in California was like, why didn't somebody tell us eggs were going to be 3 times higher? Mm-hmm. We did. So my question to you, with both of those tying it together, how do we communicate all of those things better so that it resonates instead of getting after the fact and saying you weren't listening?
Money. I mean, it's you know, Trent, it comes down to money. And as we would go around, we talked to plant agriculture. Plant agriculture goes, that's the poultryman. We don't have a lot of pork producers in California, but the dairymen, the cattlemen, they're looking at chickens right now. And we don't have a lot of pork in California, so the farrowing crate, gestation crate issue is not going to really affect us like it would affect Iowa or other states. And so we couldn't get other agriculture. As I've always told everybody, if you cut a farmer or a rancher, we all need to bleed. We all need to be there because our time is a-coming. And now they're looking at using some anesthesia if you're going to dehorn or castrate. So it's coming back around for the dairymen, it's coming back around for the cattlemen. We don't want you to hot brand, we don't want you to dehorn, we don't want you to do all these things that we do so that we can promote and protect our animals, but it's unknown. But plant agriculture and even other species within other animal agriculture, as you well know, Trent, look the other way. We just couldn't do the battle with HSUS and the amount of money they could raise.
One last question. And it was a presidential election here too.
Yeah, and that makes a big deal.
Susan Frizios, Blue House, California. 2 quick questions. One, you were talking about getting people to actually physically show up at these meetings. You neglected letter writing, and I know that my mom's been very active in this for the last 15 years on the animal rights extremists. Mm-hmm. And she went to one hearing down at the Capitol in Sacramento, and Doug LaMalfa pushed in a cart full of all of the letters that he received, emails that had been printed out, and it had a huge effect on this committee that was making the decision. And you know, letter writing is important. We wrote the letters and took them to gatherings so that they could sign them and then stuffed envelopes and mailed them. The other one being, you were talking about what happened with Proposition 2. Recently, there's been some new rules in California with regard to poultry production, and we help a poultry producer in our area, turkey ranch grower, and my mom retired from regulatory enforcement, so she went through all of their stuff and put it all together and went through all the regulations and said, they can't do this because there's no regulation. And she worked with Foster Farms through their attorneys. They said, well, we need to compromise so we can get this done. They've been compromising on this throughout the state. Mm-hmm. This is a problem as well because they don't think they can win. My mom got it won. They compromised not one bit and were able to fulfill what the permit requested. People have to fight. I'm just all excited over here listening to you.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's important. You have to fight and not give up.
Well, I know JS West did file a lawsuit over the dimensions, and then the judge told them the case wasn't right because they hadn't been harmed. So it's crazy. So I'd like to get more information because I know right now HSUS is going. They want to go all cage free.
The ruling said that the consumer wasn't harmed.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
The consumer had not been harmed.
Yeah.
It didn't speak to the chicken.
Yeah. And so right now they're going. They want to go cage free. And I'll just wrap up real quick. You're absolutely right. Day in, day out, emails, phone calls, because when you, and I'm sure Devin can speak to that, but I know talking to other folks in Congress, their staff writes down how many phone calls they get. So that's what you can do from your home. An email, a phone call, send a fax in, and they do track those. But there are times when you need to just show up. But you got to do that other all the time because those count for something.
Yeah, I just reinforce what Paul just said about supporting your fellow farmers. I've been around long enough to have seen them go after the miners. I'm a geologist. I started in the mining business, so I'm go after the miners. The loggers and the ranchers said, "Well, that's miners. That's miners' issues. We're not miners." They went after. They killed off the miners. Yeah. They went after the loggers. You know what they did to the loggers? 50% of our logging is done in the western United States, 80% and to 90%, and we're out of it. Okay, the miners and the ranchers said, "Well, I'm not a logger, so I'm not going to support those guys." Then they came after the ranchers, and we've seen what they've done: 40% down in grazing in the western United States in the last 20 years. Okay, now they're after the farmers. Yep. So we have to. That's one of the founding reasons why we put this Range Rights and Resource Symposium together, was to try to bring those different locations together to support each other. And that's, I think, the key thing that I took from what you said there. We have to work together.
Absolutely.
Because our rights and our economic livelihood are dependent upon the numbers that we can unify and put together behind each one of the resources that we develop to sustain our economy.
Yep, and we got to get those other people in the community. As I never did believe Hillary Clinton when she said it takes a village to raise a child. I think my wife and I did pretty good on our 3 sons. But it does take a community to support agriculture because agriculture supports the community. So you think once that product leaves my farm or ranch, that timber leaves that hill and all the people that it puts to work in the mills, and look what our mills have done. They've closed down. So you think about our rural communities that are dying. So it takes not just those of us that are owner-operators, but it takes those other very important upstream and downstream of our production centers to be there supporting us too, because we are the sustainable business in California, because people are going to eat, they need what we produce, and we can do it better than anybody else in the world. Trent, thank you for letting me be here for a little bit.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Paul
it.
Wenger, folks. Appreciate you.